The explanation finally arrived, and it was good. It was clear. It was logical. It connected the dots in a way that made the confusion of the previous years suddenly make sense. Supply chains, stimulus, energy prices, labor markets, you understood it. Everyone understood it. There was only one problem. By the time the explanation made sense, the moment it described was already over. The inflation it explained had already peaked. The window it was describing had already closed. The decisions that would have mattered were decisions from 3 years earlier, before the explanation existed, before the pattern was visible, before anyone had the language to describe what was happening. The story arrived complete and coherent, and 5 years too late to be useful. And this is not unusual. This is how explanations work. They become clear after the pattern is finished. They become useful after the moment has passed. They become obvious exactly when obvious no longer helps. You were not missing information. You were missing it at the wrong time. And timing is the only thing that actually decides the outcome. If you want videos that show you not just what happened, but why the explanation always arrives after the moment, subscribe now. That is exactly what this channel is built for. Sit with that for a moment. Not the explanation itself, the timing of it. Because this is not really a video about inflation. It is a video about a much larger pattern, a pattern that shapes far more of your decisions than you probably realize. Think back to the years before the explanation made sense. Prices were rising. Confusion was everywhere. Experts disagreed publicly, on television, in real time. Some called it temporary. Some called it structural. Some avoided the question completely. No one had the full picture, because the full picture did not exist yet. It was still being written by events that had not finished happening. You were living inside a story with no ending. And a story with no ending cannot be explained with confidence. It can only be guessed at. From inside the confusion, this is the part almost no one names clearly. Confusion is not a failure of intelligence. Confusion is simply what it feels like to be inside an unfinished pattern. The clarity came later, not because anyone got smarter. It came later because the pattern finally finished. Once an event is complete, it becomes possible to see its shape. Once you can see its shape, you can name it. Once you can name it, it feels obvious. That final feeling of obviousness is the trap. Because obviousness feels like it should have been available earlier, it was not. Obviousness only exists after the pattern completes. Before that point, there was only noise, contradiction, and partial information. This gap between when an event happens and when its explanation arrives is not small. It is not measured in days or weeks. It is often measured in years. Historians take decades to fully explain economic periods. Analysts take years to fully map financial cycles. Even simple personal patterns like why a relationship ended can take years to fully understand. The explanation is not slow because people are lazy. It is slow because patterns need distance to become visible. You cannot see the shape of a wave while you are still inside it. You can only see it clearly once you are standing on the shore, looking back. And by the time you reach the shore, the wave has already passed. This applies far beyond economics. A doctor sometimes cannot name a condition until enough symptoms have accumulated to form a recognizable pattern. By the time the diagnosis arrives, the earliest and most treatable window may already be gone. Not because the doctor failed, because certainty requires enough data, and enough data requires enough time. A manager sometimes cannot clearly explain why a project failed until well after the project has ended. In the middle of it, there is only pressure, deadlines, and conflicting signals. Only afterward, with distance, does the actual cause become visible. By then, the decisions that could have changed the outcome are long gone. A person sometimes cannot clearly explain why a relationship ended until months or years after it is over. In the middle of it, there is only tension, confusion, and the sense that something feels wrong without being able to say exactly what. The clear explanation arrives later, often long after the relationship has already ended. Notice the shape repeating across every one of these examples. Confusion during the event, clarity after the event, usefulness only during the event. The explanation and the usefulness almost never overlap. This is not a flaw in any single person, doctor, manager, or economist. It is a structural feature of how understanding actually forms. Understanding requires pattern completion. Patterns only complete after enough time has passed. And by the time enough time has passed, the moment for using that understanding has usually already closed. This creates a strange and uncomfortable truth. The clearest explanations you will ever hear are, almost by definition, explanations that arrived too late to help you. If they were early enough to help, they were probably still incomplete, contradictory, or uncertain. Certainty and timeliness pull in opposite directions. The more certain an explanation feels, the more likely it arrived after the window closed. The more useful the timing could have been, the less certain the explanation could have been. You cannot have both at once. Almost no one has both at once. Think again about the inflation story. For years, the public heard fragments. A supply chain expert explaining shipping delays, a central banker explaining interest rate decisions, a commentator blaming one single cause with total confidence on television. Each fragment felt like an explanation. None of them were complete. They contradicted each other constantly because each one only had a piece of an unfinished picture. You lived through years of confident, contradictory fragments. That experience was disorienting, not because you were uninformed. It was disorienting because the actual explanation did not exist yet. It was still being assembled by events that had not finished unfolding. Only years later, once supply chains stabilized, once stimulus effects faded, once labor markets settled, did a coherent story become possible. At that point, someone could finally connect every piece into a single narrative. And when they did, it felt undeniable. It felt like something that should have been obvious all along, but it was never obvious all along. It only became obvious once the story was finished. This single distinction quietly reshapes how you should treat every confident explanation you hear from now on, not with suspicion of the facts themselves, with awareness of the timing behind them. A confident explanation of a still, unfolding event should raise a small flag. Not because the person explaining it is lying, because certainty this early is usually a signal of incomplete information dressed up as clarity. Real clarity almost always arrives after the fact. That timing gap is not a rare exception. It is the default condition. Before we continue, drop a comment right now. Was there a moment when an explanation finally made sense to you, but arrived too late to change anything? Tell me below. I read every single one. Now let us look at why the brain treats clarity as if it were opportunity, even when it is not. When an explanation finally clicks, the brain releases a small sense of reward. That reward feels like progress. It feels like something has been resolved, but notice what actually happened. Nothing changed in the world. Only your understanding of the world changed. The event already happened. The window already closed. Your understanding simply caught up quietly after the fact. The brain does not naturally separate these two things. It treats understanding and opportunity as if they were the same signal. They are not. Understanding is retrospective. Opportunity is only ever present tense. You can fully understand a moment and still have zero ability to act on it. That combination feels strange, almost contradictory the first time you notice it, but it happens constantly in nearly every part of life. Think about market cycles. By the time most people fully understand why a market moved the way it did, the movement is long finished. The explanation is accurate. The window for acting on it is gone. Think about relationship patterns. By the time a person fully understands why a specific relationship failed, the relationship is long over, and often so is the next one that repeated the same pattern. The explanation is accurate. The moment to use it already passed twice. Think about career decisions. By the time an employee fully understands why a certain project was doomed from the start, the project has already ended, and the lessons often only apply retroactively. Notice the shape again. Accurate explanation, expired opportunity. Every single time. This is not because people are careless or slow. It is because understanding requires distance, and distance requires time, and time is exactly what erases the opportunity to act. You cannot stand close enough to a pattern to act on it and far enough away to fully see it at the same moment. Those two positions are structurally incompatible. This has a strange implication worth sitting with. If you are currently confused about something happening in your life right now, That confusion may not be a sign that you are missing intelligence. It may simply be a sign that you are standing too close to see the shape of it yet. The shape will likely become visible later, often when it is too late to use. This does not mean understanding is worthless. Understanding still matters deeply for the future, but it rarely arrives in time to change the event it explains. It usually arrives in time to change how you respond to the next one. That distinction quietly reframes what explanations are actually for, not for fixing what already happened, for recognizing the next version of the pattern slightly earlier than you did the last time. That is the only real leverage retrospective clarity gives you, not the ability to undo the past, the ability to shorten the gap next time, even slightly. Some people never make that shift. They keep waiting for the perfect, complete explanation before acting on anything. But the complete explanation, by its very nature, only arrives after acting is no longer possible. Waiting for full certainty is not caution. It is a guarantee of permanent lateness. The people who move differently are not the ones with better information early on. They are the ones who accept acting with incomplete information as the only real option. Available inside an unfinished pattern, they are not reckless. They are simply not waiting for something that structurally cannot arrive on time. This is uncomfortable because it means the confident, polished, well-sourced explanation you finally understood about inflation was never something you could have acted on. Not because you were too late personally, because no one, anywhere, could have accessed that explanation earlier. It did not exist yet. It was still being written by events that had not finished happening. There is one more layer to this worth naming directly. It is the way a clear explanation can quietly replace the discomfort of not knowing with the false comfort of knowing too late. When the inflation story finally became coherent, many people felt a kind of closure. Finally, an answer. Finally, something solid to hold. That closure felt like resolution. But closure is not the same as usefulness. You can achieve full closure on an event and still have gained nothing you can apply. The two get confused constantly because both produce the same emotional relief. Relief that the confusion has ended. Relief that the story finally makes sense. That relief is real. It is also, quietly, a kind of trap. Because once the discomfort of not knowing disappears, so does the motivation to ask a harder question. The harder question is not what happened. The harder question is what is currently happening right now that will only make sense years from now. That question is uncomfortable because it has no clean answer today. It cannot have a clean answer today. If it did, it would not be an unfinished pattern anymore. Most people avoid sitting with that discomfort. They wait for the next clear explanation instead, because clear explanations feel so much better than open uncertainty. But waiting for clarity means, by definition, waiting for the window to already be closed. There is a different posture available, though it is less comfortable. It involves treating current confusion not as a gap to escape quickly, but as a signal that something significant is still actively forming. Not something to solve immediately. Something to watch carefully without demanding premature certainty from it. This does not guarantee better outcomes. Nothing guarantees better outcomes inside genuinely unfinished patterns. But it does shift your relationship to confusion itself. Instead of confusion feeling like a personal failure to understand, it starts to feel like the accurate, expected texture of any moment that is not finished happening yet. That reframing alone changes very little on the surface. Underneath, it changes what you do with confusion the next time it shows up. Instead of anxiously searching for the explanation that will finally make it stop, you can start asking a smaller, more useful question in real time. What decision would I regret not making, even without full certainty? That question does not require the complete story. It only requires enough signal to act imperfectly, on time, instead of perfectly, too late. The next explanation is already being written. It will be clear. It will be logical. It will connect every dot in a way that makes everything obvious. And by the time it reaches you, the moment it describes will already be years behind you. That is not a failure of information. That is simply how explanations and events have always moved relative to each other. If this changed the way you think about the explanations you are currently accepting, subscribe now. Every week, this channel shows you not just what the explanations